when it comes to our foreign policy, does that image match our actions on the global stage? Are we really safeguarding Kenya's interests or simply showing up for the cameras?
I think for the remainder of the term of William Ruto and for subsequent administrations, we must endeavor to ensure that we only send our very best to go and represent Kenya abroad. We cannot afford a foreign policy of confusion, contradiction, and short-term ego trips. We need strategy in our foreign policy front, not spectacle. Principle, not posturing. Because when Kenya speaks, Africa listens, and the world watches.
Welcome to Politikali Konekted, a podcast on everything politics and governance in Kenya and Africa. I'm your host, Diana Ngao, and today I'll be taking you through an explainer on Kenya's foreign policy. We'll look into the historical evolution of our foreign policy and question if indeed it is advancing our national interest. Ask any Kenyan living abroad what they miss most about Kenya. They'll say the warmth, the food, and the resilience of the people. And then go ask any foreigner who's been to Kenya what they love most, and they'll tell you that Kenya is a country of peace, hospitality, and leadership. But when it comes to our foreign policy, does that image match our actions on the global stage? Are we really safeguarding Kenya's interests or simply showing up for the cameras? So let's take a look at what really is Kenya's foreign policy and why it matters. You see, foreign policy isn't just about shaking hands or signing communiques. It's about how a nation relates to the world, to protect its sovereignty, advance its economy, and uphold its values and shape the future. It's not just about diplomacy. It is the face that Kenya shows the world. It is how we protect our borders, promote our businesses, defend our values, and amplify our voice globally. A nation's foreign policy is an extension of its identity. And for Kenya, that identity has gone through multiple transformations. In Kenya's case, foreign policy has always tried to walk a tightrope between principle and pragmatism. But have we succeeded? Let's take a look at our journey from independence to current day and unpack what our diplomacy and foreign policy has achieved and why we are still struggling. Let's begin with the Moi era. President Daniel Arap Moi mastered quiet diplomacy, building up from his predecessor, President Jomo Kenyatta. During his presidency, he projected Kenya as a calm and stable regional player. Nairobi emerged as a trusted venue for peace negotiations across the Horn of Africa, especially during Sudanese and Somali civil wars. Kenya contributed troops to the UN Peace Mission, particularly in post-conflict states like Namibia, Rwanda, and Yugoslavia. Moi maintained a deliberately neutral foreign posture, especially during the Cold War, avoiding superpower entanglement while gaining credibility in Africa. Despite internal authoritarianism, Moi kept Kenya's external image one of a peaceful, neutral, and mediation country. Now let's go into Kibaki era from 2002 to 2013. President Kibaki recalibrated Kenya's global engagement with a clear economic agenda. His administration launched a Look East policy to diversify partnerships away from the traditional Western allies. This saw a strengthening of ties with China, India, Malaysia, and Gulf states, focusing on infrastructure and energy deals. Kibaki oversaw the revival of the East African community and spearheaded large-scale projects such as LabSet to link Kenya with Ethiopia and South Sudan. Kenya under Kibaki became a regional economic power, known for its technocratic governance and macroeconomic stability. Kibaki established Kenya as an innovation hub, drawing global attention as the birthplace. Now comes his successor, President Uhuru Kenyatta, in 2013, who gave Kenya a structured diplomatic philosophy. In 2014, under the Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohamed, Kenya launched its first written foreign policy document. The policy rested on 5 thematic pillars: peace diplomacy, reaffirming Kenya's role in the regional mediation; economic diplomacy, pushing trade, investment, and tourism; diaspora diplomacy, engaging Kenyan citizens abroad as a strategic asset; environmental diplomacy, amplifying Kenya's role in climate justice and conservation; and cultural diplomacy, projecting Kenya's identity, values in the international stage. Under Uhuru, Kenya hosted major international summits such as the United Nations Trade and Development Summit and the Tokyo International Convention on African Development and the Global Entrepreneurship Summit with President Obama. Kenya secured a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council in 2021 to 2022. The country expanded its diplomatic missions and strengthened relations with China, the EU, and the Middle Eastern nations. Uhuru's era marked Kenya's transformation into a global diplomatic actor, often regarded as a voice of reason in Africa affairs.
For 3 years now, we have had 2 sheriffs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The first was a former governor and now Minister for Labor, Alfred Mutua, who had a brief stint at Foreign Affairs, and then Musalia Mudavadi came in. In the last 3 years, one of the major milestones remains the seasonal paper number 1 of 2025, which attempts to concretize the policy position of diplomatic service. There are 7 pillars in our foreign policy service. We have peace and security diplomacy, which focuses on conflict resolution, peace building, and regional stability. We also have economic and commercial diplomacy that focuses on trade, investment, SME growth, African Free Trade Area, and blue economy. We also have socio-cultural diplomacy, where we focus on cultural exchange, education, sports, and health. We also have diaspora diplomacy, where Kenyans are actively involved from all over the world as active agents of our good republic. We also have digital diplomacy, where we focus on tech, cyber engagement, and cyberspace strategy. The 6th pillar is environment and climate diplomacy. Particularly, remember that in 2023, we hosted the Africa Climate Summit, where the whole continent was here. It was in Nairobi, and where we made the famous Nairobi Declaration. The 7th is the global health diplomacy, which focuses on public health collaboration and crisis response, particularly in the day and age of global pandemics. Then there is a global governance and multilateral diplomacy, which focuses on reform of global institutions and parliamentary diplomacy. This is important because, as you might be aware, that a huge chunk of countries in the global south are grappling with the debt burden, and therefore restructuring and reforming global financial architecture like IMF, like the World Bank, and other Bretton Woods institutions has become a matter of key priority to most of the countries in the global south. Let us look at what we would call diplomatic successes under President William Ruto. One, we have had some very major, very high-profile visits. One of them being the visit by the former US First Lady, Jill Biden. We also had the good fortune of hosting the King of Britain. We have also had other world leaders visiting. And in the words of the President of Switzerland, that Kenya is an emerging global player that other global actors are now unable to entirely ignore in the emerging multipolar world. But in the same vein and breath, we must also be realistic that we've made some very devastating blunders. In a conference of foreign policy actors, one of the scholars described our foreign policy as good on paper but backward in practice. Why could he have made such a scathing and devastating remark about our foreign policy? When Kenya Kwanza came into office, we made the first diplomatic gaffe between the Western Sahara and Morocco, and we were forced to bite our tongue within 24 hours. When we thought that we had moved away from that, there was also the Congo crisis. Remember, by the time President Uhuru was leaving office, we had an active peacekeeping force in DRC. Soon after, there was a massive fallout and we had to withdraw our troops. When there was the M23 incursion in DRC, we had the good fortune to intervene. But while Kenya was intervening in the DRC problem, President William Ruto reportedly made a very famous call to the President of France, President Emmanuel Macron, to help him in solving the DRC crisis. And this is why it is a blunder. There is a notion in many quarters in the diplomatic circles in the global south, and particularly Africa, that part of why Africa has been unable to solve most of its problems is that it first looks at the body language of the former colonial masters and the global north. And that until the countries in the global north, London, Berlin, Paris, Lisbon, indicate that they want things resolved in a particular manner, that is when African countries take cue and mirror the body language of these foreign masters. A case in point was when we had the Libyan crisis in 2011. While most African countries held the view that Colonel Muammar Gaddafi could have been given a free passage, there is a feeling and a thinking that certain forces in the global north wanted Colonel Muammar Gaddafi taken out. Then what happened is that these African leaders, from the African Union to the many regional bodies within Africa, including ECOWAS, SADC, EAC, did not intervene properly because they were reading the body language of the former colonial masters. So when President William Ruto called France around the problem in the DRC, there was a feeling that for someone who has spoken very eloquently about Pan-Africanism, that was a classical case of doublespeak. Away from the DRC problem, there is the Sudan conundrum. In the Sudan, and today let's understand that what is RSF and how comes that such a military organization within the Sudan has become a threat to the Sudanese people. It is a long history, and on a convenient date we shall revisit. But RSF would not have been there if there was no Darfur. And Darfur problem would not also have been there if the Sudan government under Omar al-Bashir was willing to put its foot down as a government willing to protect people, lives and property. But at the critical hour when Omar al-Bashir had the responsibility to protect the Darfur region, he decided to use a militia. That militia force then subsequently threatened the stability within Sudan. To contain it, what started as a militia force then was recognized as part of the formal army of Sudan. And in the days after and many years later, when there was the fallout in Sudan and Omar al-Bashir was forced to flee, people that had been co-opted into the army but started off as a militia then began to threaten the stability of Sudan. How did Kenya respond to this? Kenya had the good fortune of aligning with one side, with either side of this conflict. Other global actors aligned with certain factions, and the truth is we also aligned with a different faction. And the faction we aligned with is not the one that many members of the global north aligned with. And as a consequence, it has come with its own unique challenges. I still believe that Kenya as the home of diplomacy in the region must still be able to get all the forces in Sudan to come to Nairobi to sit and to agree on how they will resolve the problem in Sudan. We might have prematurely aligned with one entity or another, but I think that does not entirely take away our credibility as the only country that has ensured that there is peace in the region. As we go forward, I think that while on the diplomatic front we have tried, but I think there are also so many things that we can still get right. And one of them is making sure that we have a diplomatic service corps that is staffed by experienced and trained diplomats. It remains a disaster that we have used our diplomatic service as a dumping ground of failed politicians, of concubines of politicians, and of people who have very little use in the domestic politics. I think for the remainder of the term of William Ruto and for subsequent administrations, we must endeavor to ensure that we only send our very best to go and represent Kenya abroad. We need a foreign policy with a clear moral compass, with institutions that function, with the leadership that puts country before personality. For Kenya is a great nation, a nation of thinkers, a nation of builders, a nation of doers, and a nation of peacemakers. We cannot afford a foreign policy of confusion, contradiction, and short-term ego trips. We need strategy in our foreign policy front, not spectacle. Principle, not posturing. Because when Kenya speaks, Africa listens, and the world watches.
And this was the explainer on Politically Connected. If it moved you, challenged you, or taught you something new, hit the subscribe button, share it with a friend, and together, let's raise the civic consciousness of the continent. Until the next time, stay connected.